Bore da, a croeso i'r sesiwn hon ar gyfer athrawon a gynhelir fel rhan o'r deudydd o weithgareddau a drefnu'r ddisgyblion fel rhan o digwyddiad rhythwyr ieithoedd modern Seren Sylfaen. Cydweithrediad rhwng rhaglen Seren Llywodraeth Cymru, Llwybrau at Ieithoedd Cymru a Choleg yr Iesu. Fel ydych wedi sylwi, siŵr o fod, rydym wedi recordio cyflwyniad Sian o flaen llaw, ond rydym yn edrych ymlaen i'ch croesawu chi i'r sesiwn holi ateb fyw a bydd yn dechrau am gwarter wedi 11 our Teams live events bore yma. Good morning and welcome to this session for teachers organised as part of the two-day Seren Foundation Modern Language event for pupils, a collaboration between the Welsh Government's Seren programme, Roots Cymru and Jesus College. As you'll have noticed by now, we've pre-recorded Sian's presentation, but we look forward to welcoming you to the live Q&A session that will begin at 11:15 this morning on Teams live event. Pleser yw cyflwyno Sian Brooks, darlithydd pwnc ieithoedd modern mewn addysg gychwynnol i athrawon Prifysgol Abertawe. Mae Sian yn gyfarwydd i nifer ohonoch fel rhywun sydd â'i bys ar byls yr hyn sy'n digwydd ym maes addysg yng Nghymru. Mae'n rhannu ei harbenigedd wrth hyfforddi darpar athrawon ac yn meddu ar syniadau ysbrydoledig ar sut i gyflwyno deunyddiau digidol i'r ystafell ddosbarth ieithoedd modern, a bydd yn rhannu nifer fawr o syniadau bore yma. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Sian Brooks, subject leader in modern foreign languages in initial teachers education at Swansea University. Many of you know Sian as somebody who has her finger on the pulse of what's happening in the field of education in Wales, who shares her excellent knowledge and expertise with prospective teachers, and who has inspirational ideas on how to encompass digital resources into the modern languages classroom. And we're fortunate that she'll share many of these ideas with us in today's session. Felly croeso, welcome Sian.
Thank you so much, Meleri. Well, what we decided was that we would have a conversation rather than me give a presentation, because I think we've both got things to share on this. And of course, we're in sort of uncharted territory in many ways for me. I remember last year in about February, I'd never even heard of Zoom, and I spent my whole year looking at myself on a screen on Zoom. So, you know, things have really changed. This session is about engaging MFL learners, and this has been something that all the way through my teaching career, I know we've got to do. And we know the stats in Wales and in the UK that we've got to engage our learners. I think it's even more important in the digital classroom, but interestingly enough, in the digital classroom, we've learned, and for those of you that have done synchronous lessons, you've learned so many skills that we need to look about now, how we get those into the face-to-face classroom. So as I said, Meleri and I will talk through this presentation together because we've both got experience of this, and both of us now coming out of the classroom, it does allow you to actually reflect and think about next steps in many ways. So what I'd like to do is to think about well-being first. I think it's so important at the moment. During lockdown, I've been reflecting on my teaching career, a long teaching career. I actually qualified as a teacher in 1990, and I've worked in 7 schools and 3 higher education training places. But for me, one of the biggest things that happened that transformed my teaching was understanding about assessment for learning, how we can monitor, how we can bring pupils on in their learning. But I think it's linked to well-being, and that's what we're going to be looking at. I think we need to be creating opportunities for autonomy in our learners. So many of my student teachers on the PGC have told me that their pupils cannot work on their own. And I see that in my own children at home under lockdown, who, unless teachers are giving them a really scintillating lesson, find it hard to actually work independently. So that's something that should be a big focus. And then I'm going to look at digital contexts that can motivate learners, that can motivate you as a teacher, but with a caveat that, you know, they are just a gimmick in some way. Some of them have got some really good purposes, but Meleri and I will discuss where we think things perhaps are a step too far as well. So I've been really interested over the last few years in well-being. I was what was called a Senko years ago when I was a teacher. And I've always been interested in, you know, sort of thinking about how we meet all the needs of all our learners. But well-being has really been such a crucial thing. And we know it's such an important part of our teaching. And the Good Childhood Report, it makes grim reading really, because it says, you know, that statement there's a significant decrease in happiness with life as a whole. And we see that in our learners, we see that in our colleagues and in ourselves sometimes as well. So we need to have that focus, I think. But what really interests me is that there is, in the next quote you can see, a synergy between assessment, attainment, and with well-being. Okay, so that they both help each other, that we're never really going to get pupils who attain and achieve things unless they're happy, unless we look after their well-being. So that's the way I start. So I've been really interested in positive psychology. Martin Seligman has done some fantastic work in this area, and his PERMA model of well-being looks at things like positive emotion, relationships, accomplishment, engagement, and meaning. I think we need to think about it about the classrooms. These are questions I've been trying to ask myself about my own teaching now at university. But do pupils feel safe, at ease, happy in our classrooms? It's a good question to ask, isn't it? You know, and how do we know that they're happy? Sometimes we just say, everyone all right? And expect that sort of group response to answer that question. But we know things can go a lot deeper than that. Do pupils have a voice or a choice or agency in your lessons? Again, that's something that can be quite interesting. And when you're nervous and when you're delivering online, doing synchronous lessons, in fact, the first synchronous lesson I gave, I forgot everything that I knew. I didn't give freedom. I just controlled the whole thing. It was the only way I could survive that hour session. But I sort of forgot all of the good techniques that I know, that we need to use in the classroom. Do you foster good relationships, positive relationships? And I think we see that from the minute pupils join your classroom, isn't it? The teachers that really do that are the ones that greet pupils at the door or when they ping up on Zoom, Teams, or Google Classroom. It's the same thing, isn't it? Are you welcoming them? Are you talking to them? I worked in a school once, and part of the assessment, if they were doing lesson observations, was they monitored that you had asked every single pupil in the class a question. I think it's such a positive thing to do, to make sure that, we haven't got invisible children in our class, that we are, talking to all of them, not necessarily always praising, but acknowledging, as Deglamov says. I think that's a very important point. Do your pupils feel that the work that they do for you is meaningful? Important as well. So, have you contextualize it so they know why they're doing it, or have you, explained that to them? And then do they feel successful? And that's very important, isn't it? That we create a classroom where pupils can make mistakes, but ultimately they feel success in some ways. So these were some ideas then that have come out of synchronous teaching. I've done a lot of synchronous teaching now over the last year. I know some of you will have been doing asynchronous teaching, which brings, additional challenges. But one of the things, if you have been doing live sessions, is the chat. Would you agree, Meleri? If you think the chat has become the place to be, isn't it?
Yes, and I feel that some students and pupils, they like the chat, they prefer it, they will ask a question in chat and maybe not in a face-to-face classroom. So I think that's been something quite positive.
And that is really interesting, isn't it? How are we going to take that back into the classroom for a face-to-face? How do we give them that safe space that they can ask those questions? If you think of some of the AFL techniques of thumbs up, all those things, often you see pupils looking at what other people are responding, and they can't do that in the chat, can they? So we need to find ways of bringing that in some ways, I think. If you are actually doing a synchronous lesson, I quite like doing the whole sort of well-being check, especially on Teams. If you can put emojis or GIFs. They're all the sort of ones that have been that are acceptable to use. It's quite a nice idea if you say to someone, so how are you feeling about this? And then you ask them for all their reactions. And it is quite interesting, actually, their choice of GIF or emoji and what they've put. It can be quite telling in some ways. I quite like using the Likert scale. So that's, on a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 is not at all and 7 is loads. How do you feel about, you can say, put a number in the chat and now press send altogether. And then all of a sudden you've got a whole load of responses about things. Really good way to monitor. And of course, in the chat, you can do it at the moment that you're doing it, but you can also download, it always downloads to your computer anyway afterwards. And it's really important sometimes to go through that chat. I remember years ago seeing a lesson with a student teacher who'd used exit tickets at the end of a lesson on post-it notes. Always a good idea. And the teacher took the post-it notes and put them in the bin, didn't even look at them. And in a way, if we're not looking at some of these things that are happening in the chat, we're doing just that, aren't we? We're just throwing it away, because actually it's giving us a lot of data in some ways. The type of questions people are asking, you can tell quite a lot from looking at that. So I would definitely advise that you look through it. You can ask pupils to share just with you, again, so they have that personal sort of link to you. And you can also use it then to share links for stretch and challenge. Have you thought about this? So that you can push pupils in different ways. So Meleri, what do you think? How could we take that and put it back in the classroom, do you think? It's a tall order, isn't it?
It is a tall order, especially because technology has made it that much more easier to do these tasks, hasn't it? But yes, do you have any suggestions?
Well, I mean, a few years ago, there was something called Teach Meet. Can you remember that?
Yeah.
No, today's Meet it was called, sorry.
Yeah.
And that was a place where you could have like what's called a back channel, something going on. I think if pupils have got access to laptops or whatever in your lessons, then you could keep that virtual conversation going on. We could go back to paper and do post-it notes, different times in the lesson, ask for things. I think we've just got to think of how liberating it is for pupils to be able to express their opinions in a way in the classroom. And also the fact that not all pupils like to write things down, even though obviously that's our goal, that sometimes we can record emotions by using like emojis and things like that. They're a nice quick way of getting the same information we need by not putting any sort of cognitive overload on pupils. Now, I don't know about you, but I have not got breakout rooms completely sussed. I found them very challenging and I hate going into breakout rooms myself. They make me feel quite anxious. But reading, I've been doing some research for this session, and Doug Lemov's book on online learning suggests these things, that small groups are best, so 2 or 3 pupils. You have clear instructions. So just like as if you were doing a group work task, you absolutely, scaffold it by saying, you need to speak first, the precise timings that you've got to do. He says that 1 to 3 minutes are about the sweet spot, he calls it. And it's got to be well timed within your lesson, the crest of the wave. So when things are going really well, go into breakout room. So you've just got that energy carrying on, rather than when you've got that slump when you've almost finished. And he suggests that you drop in on students or broadcast messages to them throughout the session. I don't know if you've got anything to add there.
No, but I think that's sort of those ideas there. They're things that you can do in the face-to-face classroom as well, isn't it? In terms of pupils going back now with concentration, that's certainly going to be an issue, isn't it? Where maybe they're working now with lots of distractions around them, and being back in the classroom and concentrating. Absolutely. So I think those 2 to 3 minutes, I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that is definitely the span of attention they've got. I see it in my own children who are listening to their lessons, and I know Netflix is going to be on another device or other things going on. So they're working, they've got all of these distractions going on. They find it hard to concentrate. So that is going to be a challenge, I think, for us, is to try and tap in, but smaller amounts of information will help. I think we found out, all of us, that working in shared documents can be, really successful, can't it? I don't know how I'd manage anymore with my colleagues when we share things quickly, edit documents. And it's really good for pupils because they've got a digital record. They haven't got that bit of paper that's been chewed by the dog or whatever. And if they've got track changes, you can actually see some of the progress they've made as well. I quite like the idea of doing all right at once. And that's why mini whiteboards are so good, aren't they? Because they allow us to get everybody to share in this. And there are some nice ideas. You can use Google Slides for this feature. There are some online whiteboards. I haven't found any of them particularly successful using them, but there are some different things you can do. So this is one where I got this idea from a blog that I've got down at the bottom there. So I've taken a translation from the GCSE paper. And what I did is I just created a PowerPoint, repeated, cut and paste the same translation exercise onto every slide. And then you could put the names of the people on the top. Another way of doing this is just put the text and get pupils to create their own slide. So you could say, could you add your slide with your name? And then they all work at the same time. And you've got this grid view where you can see what everybody's doing. So it's a really nice way, you know, in terms of assessment for learning, that you can check who's on task, who's not. The only thing is sometimes these activities could bring a bit of anxiety. I don't know what you think.
Yes, especially among some pupils who maybe are not as strong as others, or who just feel anxious anyway in demonstrating their work in front of their peers. So
absolutely, and it does feel a bit of a one size fits all. So I think that could be, so you might need to think about some of those things. So perhaps on that original slide, you could have an extension task and a support task if they want.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, having a differentiated task as well, that's what it's difficult.
But then they could create their own thing. So you could, in theory, it doesn't take that long to do actually, but you could actually quickly do cut and paste. It's different things for different pupils, but they're all having the feeling that they're working together.
Yeah, that's a lovely idea. The collaborative, that word, you know, we've sort of discussed beforehand, isn't it? That they're working together, they're in this together.
Definitely. I've been on a lot of presentations recently talking about well-being, where they use this idea that when you're on an aeroplane, well, when will we be on an aeroplane again? When they always tell you that, you know, you put on your own mask first before you help someone else. And I do think we need to look after our own well-being as teachers in all that we do. And here's some tips. One of them is, I think, setting up your space. I was just talking to Meleri that because I've been teaching in my living room for the last year, I've got everything all around me, which I found has really helped me. And actually, I bought myself a standing up desk. I find that's really good for teaching. It makes me feel more like a teacher when I'm doing that. Yeah. So having somewhere that you have all your resources is really helpful. And that could be Google, it could be Teams Classroom, it could be OneNote, or, you know, just getting everything together that you need is going to be really helpful. PowerPoint has really come to its own, hasn't it, during lockdown, because what you can do in PowerPoint is organize everything. You can embed as much as possible into it. And I would suggest, if you haven't done so already, is that you set up a professional Google account, because all of the digital games really all tend to link to Google in some ways. So there's a really good way. And then if you're opening up your email in front of the class or something, it's just a professional one. It's a really helpful thing to do. I think you need clear routines. And this is something I forgot when I started teaching. I forgot all that good practice, is it needs to be consistent as well. And because now we have so many things we could do, we tend to I spend too long thinking about how things are going to look rather than thinking about the content. And one way of doing that is by having a template PowerPoint, I think. So you've got your starter there, and have 2 or 3 starters that you could use. You could have your objectives, which then become questions in your plenary. So you've got your plenary sorted as well. And you could have some even types of slides you could do. I think actually pupils would respond very well to that. They like familiarity. You know, they like, we all like branding. You know, you think about how some coffee shops are successful because you know what you're going to get when you go there. And I think that the same thing will help, but it also gives you more time as well. When you're actually teaching, it's not a good idea to be switching between too many applications. We are going to try that in a few slides' time, but it can be a bit stressful. And if you're doing Teams, Zoom, or Google Classroom, and I've done them all, you can lose that thing that you want to share so easily as well. And you can it takes up a long time. And I think you should either tell them beforehand or at the beginning of the lesson, for this lesson, you will need, so that they all know what they're going to need. Doug Lemov says we need to dissolve the screen, and that's really important, isn't it? We need to take away that feeling that it's artificial, because it's still you and it's still your pupils, and try and use perhaps some of the usual props that you use in your classroom. Now, I know I have a real privilege in my job is that I see into so many wonderful modern language classrooms, and I see fantastic things. I see teachers who wear scarves, I see flags, I see all sorts of brilliant things, you know, little sort of desktop bells that you get in a hotel, kitchen timers. And in some ways, holding up a kitchen timer or an alarm clock is going to be much more of a visual engaging prop than having an PowerPoint timer, isn't it? So it's bringing back some of those classroom routines, very useful.
And I guess it's paring back, isn't it? You know, what you're saying here takes me back to when I started teaching and before technology, isn't it? So I think that's something that strikes me.
Do you know, I've been thinking more and more because, you know, I've been working on using technology for a long time, and I've had a bit of a, I don't know, like a eureka moment during the whole year, is that actually we need to just think about what skills we have in us and what we can do with, you know, some very, very simple things in some ways, simplifying it right down, you know. So because the choice that we've got is, you know, you think you go into a certain sandwich shop and you could have 10 types of bread, 20 types of fillings, and it's overwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so we need to cut back on that in our planning, but also it's overwhelming for pupils if they've got too much, I think. Okay, so these are then some of the ways that are quite nice. Classroom screen has been around for quite a few years. It's a free, well, it was a free interactive whiteboard. Okay, really nice idea. It's got different things you can do. You can change the background. You can embed things. So here I've embedded Quizlets, quite straightforward to do. You can do random name generators. You can click on dice. You can have symbols that come up. You can write. So it's a really nice way of keeping everything that you need for a lesson on one screen, but also you could use it within the classroom as well. So I used to use this in my teaching, and now, like a lot of apps, they've seen that people are using these all the time. So now there are functions that if you spend more, you know, if you spend some money, you can get some, you know, you can save your screens and things like that. Okay. But this is a free one I've done. So I would definitely recommend you have a look at it because it's got some really nice things that you can do. This is one that's very popular at the moment called Wooclap. And what it does, it does the same sort of thing. You upload your PowerPoint. So this is this PowerPoint I've uploaded. So I can click on start and start my PowerPoint. But what I can do is I can add quizzes. So the quizzes are hosted on the cloud, the digital platform, and my PowerPoint is sitting there as well. So you can actually go from quiz back to PowerPoint really easily. So everything there is like a one-stop shop, if you like. So again, something worth thinking about. This is one I've got. Now, if you notice at the top of my screen, I've got a class code and I'm using Classpoint. And I downloaded this and it is like in the ribbon of my PowerPoint now, it's constantly there. And what it helps you do is add all sorts of quizzes and interactive things into your PowerPoint. But once pupils have sort of put the code in at the beginning of the lesson, they can just they can answer any of the different things that you're doing. So if I clicked on multiple choice here, so this is a question, which do you think is the most effective of these things? Classroom screen, Google Classroom, Wooclap, or Classpoint? What happens is, so Meleri, do you want to have a try at doing it again?
Yeah, I will do it. So this is live, if it will work. Yay, worked.
Fantastic. So then we are. So what can you see? What you've done is that it's quite straightforward in that you don't have to come out of the application. Yeah. So no. Wooclap is doing it a different way. They take everything, but this one is embedded, and I quite like this one. I think it's quite nice. You can embed quizzes. You can do word clouds. You can have little sort of like mini whiteboards, really, where everybody could write at the same time. And you can do drawings as well. I think you can take 25 pupils. So it would work best probably with like a GCSE class.
Yeah, and I guess we were talking about well-being. That's an excellent way of checking, you know, sort of if the technology was allowed in in lessons, or perhaps, you know, at home as homework, you know, to see how they're getting on with their tasks, isn't it? As an assessment for learning.
So this is an idea I've had because I remember starting doing quizzes quite a few years ago now, and I know a lot of people like quizzes at the moment. And all of these online quizzes, they don't take that long to do. However, it's just another job you've got to do, because especially when you're using languages, you've got to get the accents, the upside down question marks, all of these things, and you have to write it in a Word document and you cut and paste through. Just takes a lot of time. So I've tried this out with my family. I haven't tried it out with the classroom, so I'm saying that in advance. But I was wondering if we could like bring back the old-fashioned things. Now, I don't know, Meleri, you're younger than me, but I remember doing lots of listenings, which were just me and a piece of paper and a pen. So I'd say something and then they had to write it down, or little quizzes like that. It didn't have anything authentic. It was just me as a teacher, you know.
Dictation.
You could set up a couple of these, if you like, on Kahoot or quizzes or whatever, and you could just put answer 1, 2, 3, or 4, A, B, C, or D. And then you know on your sheet which ones are the right answers. And you could just ask a question. So in Spanish, it could be, I'm going to ask you a question. ¿Cuántos años tienes? Which is the right answer? Tengo 2 animales. Me llamo Paulo. Tengo 13 años, vivo en Swansea. So then you could just get them to ask this, and the same effect would happen on Kahoot. You know, you get that sort of feedback and the things that the pupils like, but you're just cutting down the work in some ways. So it was just a thought. I'd be interested if anybody tries that out. I'm all for finding ways of making life easier for teachers, because I think everybody works far too hard. This is something that's a really nice technology that's coming in now from Microsoft Forms and from Google Forms, that you can create like self-marking work. I took a reading comprehension from the GCSE, just put it in here, and basically you can have graded or whatever. You can use this through Teams, and it just marks it for you. So I mean, that sort of cuts down the work. It didn't actually take very long, because that's the benefit of digital technology. You can just cut and paste into this, get the answers, and then you don't have to mark those. So that's one bit less of work to do in some ways. So this one is quite nice. So it's working on Gianfranco Conti's sentence builders. I don't know if you've seen these. They've taken Edu Twitter and the MFL Twitterati by storm. And a lot of these things, I don't know if you think, Meleri, I remember doing like sentence things like this for years. But I think it's reinforced some of those traditional techniques. And he is a fantastic voice in modern language education. So what I've got here is, this was another idea I pinched. I'm a bit of a magpie. I saw this from the blog's called MFL Craft. On Twitter, she's Botones Salgado, fantastic digital pioneer in modern languages, this teacher. And her suggestion was putting one half of the sentence builders in one wheel and the second half in the other. I was thinking of making that even a bit easier, is if you put 1 to 12 here and A to whatever it was, L, it was a really good idea of cutting down workload, because what you could do, I'm going to stop share and hope it works. Hold on, good, switch. This is where. So can you see that, Meleri?
Yes, I can see it now. Yeah, it's come through.
So what I've done here, we're on Classroom screen. So this is my hosting thing. I've got the sentence builders here, and this is from another app called, which is all about doing these wheel of names. So I could click on this, click on this one. So then you could build up your sentence. So it's going to be 8C. So that's what, when it's sunny. Can you read that?
When it's sunny, stay at home. Wow, I think we've all stayed home too long this year.
Absolutely. It's quite a nice idea. So I think what that does, that's a nice little way of showing how you can do something interactive. This is really popular with pupils, these sorts of like, spinning around, bit of a game show feel to it. But if you just put the letters in, you could use it if you're teaching different languages, and it can, it's a much quicker thing to do, isn't it?
Yes, and you could just change one side, for another topic, you could recycle that grid so many times. I think that's such a lovely idea. And as you say, it's in English, or it could be in Welsh. You could use it for many languages, and I think that would cut down a lot of time as well when preparing. No, that's
Absolutely.
a lovely idea.
So we're now looking at autonomy, and I said this has come up because so many of my student teachers have said pupils cannot work on their own, and I'm not sure everybody who's watching this will agree with that. It's a real problem that we've got. So we've got to try and create some opportunities. You probably will all have got vocabulary lists. Over the border in England, they call these knowledge organisers. I think I'm seeing it more and more in Welsh classrooms. But it made me think, when I first saw a knowledge organiser, I thought, well, this is what I've always done. But actually, we need to structure them to allow independent work. And it's only for me as a parent, I'm a Welsh learner and a parent, and when my children bring Welsh homework home, if there isn't something that's clear that I see, like a vocabulary list or a knowledge organiser, I'm really going to struggle with the homework to help them, to support them in some ways. So I think it's a really good way of thinking about how we can build autonomy. The really good quote here from Miller, 2018, who says, for them to be useful, we've got to think about the purpose. We've got to think about the content and the pedagogy involved in these. Okay, so that's something to think about. I also think there's a lot that we can do with collaborative work, as we were talking about earlier, Meleri, and those shared writing as well. That's a really good way of developing pupils' independence in some ways. I just saw, went to a fantastic virtual conference at the World's Education Summit, all about multilingual and multicultural classrooms. And there the message was we should be encouraging our pupils, talking about the new curriculum and LLC and translanguaging, to be writing in all their own languages. And so there is options here as well to be using this in a, thinking about the curriculum for Wales as well. So another thing then is choice. We know that choice can really help engage pupils. We all like it, don't we, when we've got some choice. And it also helps them, I think, make better decisions. It gives them some of that grit, that word we keep hearing a lot of at the moment. So those are the type of things I think we need to be doing to get pupils to be more independent. Now, looking at knowledge organisers, in my mind, my vocabulary list, this is one I got from a blog, used to look like this in some ways. Now, some of the ones this is one from Michaela School. If you might know the Michaela School, it's very big on Twitter, published 2 books about the way they teach. They were critics initially of their approach, which is very traditional, no PowerPoints, no interactive, no digital technology, a lot of like chalk and talk type teaching. But they've had fantastic success in their results, and a double outstanding from Ofsted, from the English Inspectorate. And I just thought it was interesting to look at what they think a knowledge organiser should look like. They agree, and this is what people like Gianfranco Conti do. They use a lot of literal translation. So that is where you actually say, you think in Welsh, Meleri, if you're going to say like, how would you say I'm scared? Is that right?
So yes, it's the structure.
So if you
is
actually
so different,
wrote, so how would you tell people what that actually means? So there is a fear on me, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct.
And it's getting pupils to understand exactly what they're saying. So a lot of research is saying that that's a really good way of encouraging pupils to understand the structures of a language. So, and then it's the idea is authentic. And the only thing I was thinking, that there aren't many 14-year-olds in France who are going to be saying, il est normal que j'aille en vacances avec ma famille. And I do think it's probably comes from a sort of more of an academic thought about what people should be saying. But it's something to think about. I really like this one I found. that had a Q&A format. And the idea is, if you look at it, you could easily see that a learner could take sentences and start building up things really nicely. And I think back to when I was doing my vocabulary lists, is that I only thought of them as everything they needed on that topic. I never thought about them using this independently. And it might be that, you know, lots of people do, but I feel probably they don't always think about it. And I think this is a good opportunity to restructure that. So you think that what you create is an independent resource in some ways. This was something that worked really well as a collaborative group task. It's using Padlet. Padlet is like a digital piece of paper. So it's really good for sharing ideas. It's really bright and colourful. People tend to really like it. And this is one where we used a map. It was an interactive map that they've got as one of their features. I got these sentences from Tess, from Times Ed, from someone's resource, and I set them up into groups, different groups. They each had a sentence, and they had to find out where all of the underlined words came from, their sort of etymology, and then place it on the map. And it was a really engaging thing, and it was really fascinating as a teacher, as I could see that map change as they were adding and thinking about where things came from. So certainly with the new curriculum, you know, curriculum for Wales, that's quite an interesting task, I think, to do. So digital context that motivates. As I said, I do think there's you know, we need to be using digital technology, if you like, to help us think about authentic tasks or authentic contexts. And we know that one of the 12 pedagogical principles is that we create authentic texts for learning. And those can be really simple things, can't they? That rather than studying something, you know, like that is very disconnected from their lives, that we actually contextualize it in some ways. And that's why I remember when I was teaching years ago using The Simpsons for a family. And I know even now people use The Simpsons, even though it's not as popular as a series, because we want to try and get that context. They understand different family members, pets, you know, good descriptions, because we're constantly trying to find ways, aren't we, of trying to engage pupils and use that context. And I think that's where digital platforms and apps can support. A lot of teachers now use these Bitmojis. For me, it's quite nice. You can look younger and slimmer when you're doing them, but it's quite a nice way to engage learners in some ways, I think, to sort of have that familiarity with the teacher in the classroom. I really like using Google Maps. I started teaching when, you know, teaching directions was like a hand-drawn map of, you know, left, right, you know, and then you go to the country and it never looks like that, does it? But really nice way, a web quest is, you know, using, asking pupils, right, you're in La Bodega and you need to get this, or where could you stay? You know, they can make the map bigger, they can go down real streets. It could be like in Spain, or it could be where they live as well. So it's giving them some authentic context, I think.
I've seen some really good virtual tours as well, where they create a virtual tour, so they could use PowerPoint but add music to it, you know, so that they're creating a promotional video. Yeah, I think that's where technology can really support, especially you know, sort of. I used to do around the school. We used to have a treasure hunt, you know, giving them instructions in Spanish or French, but perhaps we're not quite there yet, maybe. But this is definitely like an idea, so that you stay in the classroom, but you go outside as well.
One of my students, she wasn't driving, obviously, but she's filmed, her boyfriend was driving and she filmed going around her town. And I think those are quite nice, isn't it? Just seeing different things as well. So that's using technology. But as you said, you know, using what's familiar to them, or then what can engage them from around the world. I noticed, because my own children, Spotify is really, you know, they love Spotify, but it's a really nice resource you can use. You can look at what's, you know, trending, what's in the top 50, the top 200. They can do web quests. There's lots of numeracy activities with the data that you can get. So, you know, this is just one example, and there are so many things that you can use to, you know, just give some variety, I think, to what you're teaching. Now we were talking, weren't we, Meleri, both of us were thinking, is this a step too far? I don't know. So this is a great site, Genially, where you can do presentations and all sorts of very, very professional looking things. So it only took me a few minutes to do these. It's a board game. I started doing a French board game, but it does take some time to do the whole thing. But on this site, there's a whole gamification section where you could do board games like this, or you could do escape rooms. So that's a big trend at the moment, isn't it? The escape rooms, the virtual escape rooms.
Yes. I was going to ask you about games, though, because I know, we create games because we think they engage, but I think we need to be careful with games as well, is that they last longer than a minute or 2 minutes, I think, is being selective, I think, in the types of games and what the outcome should be.
100%. And in a way, that's the same that was years ago, because I remember people creating board games in modern language classrooms was quite a popular activity in the 1990s, shall we say, with paper and pen and Pritt sticks, whatever. But it's the same thing as doing it now online, isn't it? And you do have to think, is it worth it? I tell my student teachers on the PGC that they've got to be principled in their approach. They've got to know why they're doing things. So if it's not actually going to benefit the learning, but it's a good engagement tool or it'll motivate pupils, then it might be worth doing. If it helps you as a teacher feel more motivated because it's something new and exciting to try, then it's worth doing as well. But ultimately, you're absolutely right. It could just be a gimmick, couldn't it? And, doing an escape room might be an exciting context, but is it going to necessarily improve their learning? Well, not necessarily. If you haven't really thought about the questions, then it's not going to, is it?
Yes, so I guess you got to think, is it low preparation and high impact, or is it high preparation and low impact? I think that's what you need to sort of balance out.
That's a really good point. I mean, we did, when we were talking, we thought, well, could we set this as a homework for pupils to do it, create their own? Because I find we both came up with the same opinion that, our pupils, sometimes they're supposed to be digital natives, but they really struggle with some things on, with technology. But when it comes to uploading, that's where uploading and downloading and finding Wi-Fi, actually, they are skilled in that. They would actually find this quite an easy task to do, I think, to create this. So it could be something that you could set as a homework and try it. I don't know. But you're absolutely right. And we do need to bear that in mind. We've got, this is a really popular thing at the moment. I tried it with my PGC students. It felt like a step too far for me, but it's called Blookit. This is Blookit Cafe. And you input a lot of vocabulary and translations, a bit like Quizlet. And it gives you loads of interactive quizzes that they can do. Some of my student teachers think it's amazing and love it. So I've just put the link there for you to try if you're interested in. I think until I had my sort of eureka moment, I've always tried to get the latest trends. So when I saw people were making Bitmoji classrooms, I made my own. So this one, when it's in Google Slides, you click on the picture and it takes you to Swansea University. You click on the Maya Angelou quote and you can hear her speak on YouTube. You click on any of the books and it takes you to things. So we were trying to work out, weren't we, Meleri, so what?
Yeah.
So
I've read quite a bit, especially I think maybe with a younger primary. I think it could be useful, just especially the past year with lockdown. It's given them, they can see their classroom. I think it's been a comfort. I think that everything is set out as their classroom would be. But so what's your opinion there?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I did it because it was the latest trend, and then I started thinking, was it? I mean, I think if it's your one go-to place for them to have everything, when you've done it, then they can use it, year on year. Is it something worth investing in? I'm not quite sure there. I think you have to decide. I think for some teachers, and I see it in my student teachers, there's a complete divide. Some of them, they're not really interested in using any sort of new things. And I don't encourage that. I really encourage your own response and what you feel works for you. But there are some that are really caught up in it. And I think that I was probably like that as a younger teacher. Certainly, I had to try the latest thing. Now, probably because I'm older, I just feel a bit more cautious and just thinking like, is it helping the learning or is it helping? Flippity, again, really popular. Have you seen this in action?
No, I haven't seen this one, no.
So you use a Google sheet, Google spreadsheet, and you write the pupils' names or anything that you want down, and you just upload it to this site, and it creates these really interactive little games. And they can be nice ones, you know, like a matching game. And, you know, I go back to when I started teaching, we were still doing those games, but I was making those little matching cards, you know, Helmanism, isn't it? I remember doing Kim's game, when things disappear, taking in a tray with a big, you know, towel over it with all of the things that you take off. I often tell my students that sometimes it's really nice to think old school. And if you're teaching clothes, take some clothes in, hold things up.
Yeah, I remember having a clothesline, bringing all my clothes in and pegging them in the classroom. And, you know, the word was realia, wasn't it? Making it real.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And in a way, if we take everything online, then it loses that sort of like focus. Though I have to say, as a bit of a karaoke addict, I really like the idea of this. I've seen a lot of non-languages teachers doing it, using lip syncs to, you know, it's a nice way, builds up confidence. They're not actually singing, so that they're changing their mouth shape, which is actually really important for pronunciation anyway. But in a nice way. And I think I'm sure younger watchers today who will embrace TikTok, I think that's going to be the next big thing to do. I've seen like some of my student teachers, one of them created a fantastic TikTok on how to make guacamole, and she was, you know, doing all the ingredients in Spanish. You know, there's lots that can be done there, but I think that's for a whole new generation of teachers to take on board. I've got some links there, some interactive links, some of the things I think you should look at if you're interested in exploring this field, from Gianfranco Conti, Joe Dale, who's the absolute guru on anything to do with technology, this MFL craft, Botano Salgado, fantastic resources, and a Padlet she's created with loads of good ideas, and then MFL Classroom Magic. And each one of these, if you click on them, takes you to that site. So you could have a look at some of these things, and you know, they may enhance your teaching, they may give you a little boost as well to help you prepare.
I've been using quite a bit of Flipgrid, and I like that, you know, sort of to gain responses and to give verbal feedback. Again, it saves time on writing down your feedback, where you can give it as verbal feedback, especially for oral exams, practice, speaking, you know, adding, and I think it's really lovely, and you can add nice frames, so it makes it a bit more pupil friendly, I think. So
absolutely. Quizlet, I mean, that's been around for a few years now, but you know, Quizlet Live, fantastic. You know, I was never convinced it was going to work really well in the classroom, but it's just brilliant. And I've trialed that I've taught it in classrooms, seen it, you know, some good things there. But I think to end now, the main thing is that you as a teacher are the greatest resource, 100%. Any of these things, they can make things look a little bit jazzy, but actually it's you, it's your knowledge, your enthusiasm and your energy that's going to be the big difference in your pupils' education. So should we draw to a close now, Meleri?
Yes, I've thoroughly enjoyed our session. It's felt like a conversation, and I think that's been great. Felly, diolch yn fawr. Dyna ni am y sesiwn wedi recordio. Fe welwn ni chi am y sesiwn fyw nawr am gwarter wedi 11 ar Teams Live. Lle gallwch chi holi cwestiynau I Sian. I think that's it for now. I've really enjoyed this conversation, but you'll have your session at 11:15 when you join us on Teams Live, and we'll see you then. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much, Sian.
Nice.